Thursday, October 23rd, 2025. Please join me in a salute to the flag of our nation. Ready? Salute. Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, please call the roll.
Bruce Riston.
Here.
William Bynum.
Here.
Bill Connolly.
Here.
Janet Goodson.
Here.
Kyle Daly.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, next up is a consent agenda. And would you like, anybody have any errors or omissions or anything on that? Like to pull it? Any public comment on our consent agenda? I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
That's where one of you guys say second. All right, there you go. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's great. Now we're up to 4 special agenda, a presentation. This is 4.1, presentation on interconnect surface water, ISW. I'm going to ask, is there anybody online or have we had any electronic comments?
No, we did not have.
Then I won't bring it up again. So you're up, presentation.
Hi,
Hi.
Becky Fairbanks, Sigma Grant Project Manager. I'm just going to give a brief intro and then turn it over to our consultant, Laura Foglia, who will do the presentation. So we're going to bring to you today, the topic is interconnected surface waters, or ISWs as we like to shorten it. We're going to give you a little background, just kind of like an introduction of what interconnected surface waters are. You're going to hear what DWR's recommended corrective actions for us were. You're also going to hear us talk about a proposed monitoring network for this topic. I just want to give a little clarity that we're talking about wells that are already in the system, wells that have at least 5 years of data. So not to be confused with the wells that we will be installing and adding to our networks. You're going to hear this topic was brought up to the Wyandotte Creek Advisory Committee, or the WAC group, at their meeting earlier this month. You're going to hear their comments and public comments about this topic. You're also going to see our proposed amendment. However, we're not asking you to take action at this time. We're going to wait until you hear the second topic, which is very related, and then we'll ask you to take action at that time. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Becky, for the introduction. So I think we kind of already introduced the topic. So I think this part of the presentation is there is some repeat. I think the second part is it's gonna be something new for you. So I think it's important to leave question for later on. So the main topic is really look together at the selected interconnected surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystem representative monitoring sites. We call it RMS, but I'll try to avoid acronyms because I know they drive everybody crazy. And then approve the approach and timeline to develop these the new sustainable management criteria for these interconnected surface water. And whatever input you have, you can just stop me anytime. So quick revision of what is the interconnected surface water and what are currently sustainable management criteria. First of all, also why are we doing this? What needs to change in the plan, and what is driving the changes, which is really what we got from Department of Water Resources on recommended actions. So that's it's not that the GSA is doing this because of just nothing else better to do, right?
Spend money? Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
It's not because of that. There were some actions that made your plan was still approved, but something needs to happen in the next 5 years.
So
sure.
You're saying that DWR approved our plan, but contingent upon these data gaps being filled.
Yeah.
So what you're saying?
It's not really contingent, but basically because of how sigma is structured, so there is a revision, not a revision, there is a periodic evaluation every 5 years. Basically, when they approved the plans, they provided a suggestion, and they hope to see this being taken into account in the following 5 years. It's not that you, Yeah, and they might not be completely there. They have been very clear in recent meetings that they just want to see that the GSA is working toward. So it's might be just the beginning, might be just a new network, and you have 2027, 2032, and then you can keep going. So it's not that all the action needs to be completely implemented in 100% by 2027. But they want to see the progress. Yeah, and they've been very clear on that. So this is where we are on our timeline, which is short. And most of the work, remember, will be done by March, which is when your grant expires. There will be still probably some final wrap-up ahead of submitting the periodic evaluation and the plan amendment by January 2027. So this is why the first months are kind of, and then you have only the very end of 2026. So what we are talking about today is interconnected surface water. In the legislation, the way they define it, DWR would like to see some kind of quantification of what is the volume of water that is depleted from surface water bodies because of groundwater pumping. It's very tricky because obviously, the surface water depends on partially on pumping, but also on precipitation and whatever type of runoffs. In some places we have seen, for example, fires. They have a huge impact on surface water. So there are a lot of things. So it's difficult to, this task of really evaluating the impact that is just due to pumping, it's not easy. So that's why we are talking about data and getting a better sense of what's happening. So when we look at interconnected surface water, we think about a surface water body with the groundwater. And in the picture that you have here, you can see the water table is the blue line just under the grass part. And it's in this case, it's above the surface water level. So when we look at something like this, we say that the groundwater is feeding water into the surface water system. So there is some base flow, if we want to, that makes it into the stream. The importance of this base flow is that it keeps kind of the flows in the stream. It keeps the temperature because groundwater is cooler. And sometimes for some ecosystem, it's important also the temperature, not just the quantity. So this is kind of ideally how things look like. But then when we look in reality, we can have 3 different conditions. The one on the top is exactly like what we have in the previous figure. So the groundwater is feeding water into the stream. When we look at the one in the middle, you see that the stream and the aquifer are still connected. So there is still a blue area that is just below the riverbed. But the water table is below the level of the river. Of the riverbed, and so the water is going from the river into the groundwater. So when we have something like that, they are still connected. So that stream is still defined as interconnected surface water, but it's losing water into the aquifer. And then when we move to the third one down on the bottom, you see that there is a brown unsaturated area between the riverbed and the aquifer, and that means that the two are disconnected. So the river is still losing water into the groundwater system, but this water is going through the unsaturated zone, and it's not really because of pumping. So pumping does not really have a direct effect on that water that is lost anyway. So what the GSA really needs to look at are the first two conditions, the gaining and the losing stream when they are connected. And obviously it's not that this condition may happen in the same river depending on the season. Like winter time, things might be like the river might be gaining water from the groundwater system. In the summertime, when everything goes lower, then there is a losing condition. What is important is also that there is if we can see a recovery over the winter time, just because that's a natural seasonal cycle. So what is currently in the GSP, the one that you guys submitted in 2022, so what is required by the legislation is to define what is the undesirable results when it comes to interconnected surface water. And in the GSP is defined as the depletion of surface water flows caused by groundwater pumping significantly and unreasonably impacting beneficial uses of surface water. And this is really the definition that you approved back in the days. And there is no significant need to change it. It might be revised if we feel like we want to, but it's more like a framework of what you are really looking forward to. In terms of the criteria that we need to define, we have measurable objectives that are pretty much where you would like this system to be in 2042. Or maybe earlier, who knows, but at least by 2042. So that's the goal. And interim milestones are like groundwater levels throughout these 20 years of implementation. What is really critical is the minimum threshold, which is the level, the groundwater level that you don't want to cross. And why are we talking about groundwater level, even if it's interconnected surface water? Because in the GSP for Wyandotte, same as 99% of the other GSPs, groundwater level has been used as a proxy. So groundwater level goes up and down. They tell us if the river is losing or is gaining. And so they are used as a, like, alarm system, let's say. So DWR, I think, down the road is hoping for GSAs to move away from groundwater level as proxy, but so far, I think this is what we have available. And just to remind you, the groundwater level minimum thresholds, they were reduced. They were set up to reduce the risk to domestic wells. So it was not really thinking back in 2022. It was not done thinking about interconnected surface water. So this is something just to keep in mind. And the reason was because of the data gaps. So basically, in the GSP, I feel like what was really acknowledged is that there was a significant data gap for interconnected surface water, and there was some need to really gather new information to have a better sense of where do we even have interconnected surface water in the basin? Where are the areas where we really need to spend some time and money? And DWR, obviously, they always acknowledge and they appreciated the GSPs where it was clear the GSA understand there are data gaps. So, but still, they made it as a part of their corrective action that they want to see this number 2, if you see there, continue to fill data gaps. So that's kind of the key. And these are the 4 key corrective actions that refer to interconnected surface water. So the first one, we're still waiting for the document. So it will be out at some point. Oh no, they say this month, but now it's the 23rd, 24th, whatever. And they want to, they suggest to continue the data gaps filling, which is what the GSA is doing. Collaboration and coordination with other local, state, and federal agencies. This is very similar to what we said, if you remember, when we did the water quality. They just want to see that things are coming together. And then they will want to see a better justification for the groundwater level monitoring site that are used for interconnected surface water. So a better justification for the monitoring network that will be used for ISW. And I will not take you through this. This is what we have done. We took the recommended action and see how this will translate into changes in your plan. And what you will get at some point, sooner rather than later actually, is going to be a red line version of the plan exactly for those chapters that are on the right side of that table. So for what have we done so far for these estimates of depletion interconnected surface water?
Can I ask you to back up one?
Sure.
It says discuss ongoing collaborations with Nature Conservancy, other environmental organizations, and local stakeholders. I think that makes it sound like local stakeholders are last or something. I mean, about farmers and ranchers or something like that, or ground. I mean, you know, I mean, give them.
Yeah, we can
give them
bring
a
it
better
up.
bite at the
Yeah,
apple. You
I
know
get
what
it.
I'm saying? Because when I first glanced at that, I thought it was just the first.
No, you're right.
Okay.
I don't think that
Can we
list
flesh
goes,
that out a little bit so that we point
yeah.
out ranchers, farmers, and domestic well users, something like that?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, but that's a good point. I don't think that list was made in any priority.
Right.
But it's a good point.
Okay. Sorry.
No problem. And okay, when we talk about depletion, so the first thing we did, you know that you have integrated hydrological model that can be used, and it has been used for the GSP, which is called the Butte Basin Groundwater Model. Out of that model, we look at the streams that are represented in the model, and we checked what it's from the model perspective. So the model is not perfect. It's what is connected and what is disconnected. So the Feather River is clearly blue, and what blue means is that the river is gaining more than 80% of the time.
What do you base that on? Because when copper's burned up and they had a plume of pollution, it did not go to the river. It went north to south. So what scientific basis are we saying the Feather River is gaining water from the GSA?
It's just from the model perspective. So it says that basically groundwater levels in the area around the Feather River are generally higher enough.
Than the river?
Yeah.
So they are perking in, but
Yeah.
it's...
And it's not perfect. It's a model. So.
Okay, yes. We're making a big assumption because I know everybody thought that the groundwater from Coppers was going to go to the river, and they actually found it ran towards Palermo.
Okay.
And so it's a big assumption that how do we, probably needs a correction, right? That's all I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're supposed to be doing, is filling those data gaps in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this is just based on the model, and there were not many data next to the river to really be able to say this is correct, this is wrong. So that's going to be the next step. So this is just to give you an idea of something that we have, but that needs some
and I'm no hydrologist.
checking.
I'm just county supervisor with local history. I'm sorry if I...
So this is general as opposed to concise.
Yeah, but for example, this kind of local information are very useful because they can help understanding. And you know, from the perspective of, you know,
It's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think, you know, right there
As
directly
close to
to
the
the
river.
east, it would have, and especially with Cobble, it would have been running that way. But you can check it out. When they test drilled, it ran south,
that's good to know.
parallel. Okay.
Okay,
I'll
so
show.
but and this is part of the reason why we are not really just using the model to make the decision. So the model is more for you to understand that we have something that maybe down the road can be used. And it gives us a sense, you know, the Feather River looks like it's mostly connected and gaining. If you look at South Honkac is green, which is a mix. which probably makes sense depending on the season and whatever. And the orange is the North Wyandotte, and that one is mostly losing. So, which is also probably something. And we are not saying losing 100%, but it's still most of the time. And the model can give us this volume that you see in the table, this monthly gains from groundwater. Again, it's from the model, so it's not; those are not the numbers that we would put forward as criteria, sustainable management criteria, because we need to check them against the data. That's, I think, the data is something that all the stakeholders will accept way more and will trust more, so that's the direction. And this is why we are talking about revamping the interconnected surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystem monitoring network. So what we have done so far is, after the work in the original GSP, a lot of more digging for information and existing data. We really look at we want to use new wells, but with new wells, I mean wells that are already there and that they are collecting data since at least 5 years. So we are not just using one good year. You don't want to use 2025, which is generally has been all over Northern California, has been a quite good year in terms of levels, as a way to set criteria. So we are using the past 5 years at least, and sometimes we have more. So there are existing shallow wells with this characteristic of having historical data, and we are also looking at shallow wells that are not too far from surface water bodies. And so we found 8 wells in the sub-basin that kind of stayed in this criteria, and 5 of these were in the 2022 GSP are shallow, so they can be used. And we are proposing to add the 3 that are with the red circle around in the map. And honestly, here there is not much in terms of discussion, because this is pretty much all what we have at the moment. So our suggestion was, let's start creating this new interconnected surface water network, show to DWR that we understand that we need to keep doing more, and that this is why new wells will be drilled with the grant funding. But this is a good starting point for 2027. And this is our timeline. So basically, by March, we are hoping to set some preliminary criteria for the 8 wells that basically I just talked about, 5 from the previous GSP and 3 from the newly funded found data. Sorry, and then in January 2027 there would be the submission of the periodic evaluation and the plan amendment with these preliminary SMCs, let's call them, and then the new wells will go down, and data will be collected between March 26 and January 2032. And by then, there will be a full new network again. And so I think it's going to be, it will work out with DWR to show that something is happening every time. And by January 2032, ideally, we will have a network that we all feel comfortable about in terms of interconnected surface water. And does it work for everybody? Looks like it makes sense, the timeline. And in terms of minimum threshold, what we want to bring up, and you will see this something similar in the next presentation, so I'm not going to spend too much time. I just want to remind the way, the concept we have to use for setting up this minimum threshold is really to think about protecting all the beneficial users and uses of groundwater. And it can be interconnected surface water, groundwater-dependent ecosystem, domestic wells. When we talk about interconnected surface water, we are really talking about the shallower part of the aquifer. And so those are the 3 key components, the 3 key beneficial users of groundwater. And if you look at the map at the plot, sorry, on the right. And this is just for just giving you some indication, some illustration of how things may look like. So in the plot, you have for a specific well the data from 1978 until 2022. You see that the lowest value was in terms of groundwater level was reached in 2014, 2015 during the drought. So in a lot of the basins around, they were using this lowest level that sometimes is 2014, 2015, sometimes is 21, 22. So depending on where you are, those are the two big droughts. So either one or the other is the minimum. And so one idea may look like looking at this lowest level, take a buffer below so that there is some operational range. And we say they are 15 feet, but it can be something that needs to be discussed. It's just to give you a sense of how to think about the protection, and then use that as a minimum threshold or something like that. In this specific case, I think it's also important to consider that this well, for example, is about 30 feet below ground, so it's really a shallow well. And when we talk about groundwater-dependent ecosystem, and Byron will be talking about that, there is a general direction on using some kind of depth to groundwater as the driver to try to understand, is there a groundwater-dependent ecosystem or not? Because if the groundwater is too low, then probably there is not even a groundwater-dependent ecosystem. And that reflects then also to interconnected surface water, because they really go together, the interconnected surface water and the ecosystems. So this is just for you to think about, like, just to get a sense. And also I want to bring up the dashed red line is actually for that specific well is the minimum threshold that you have right now in the current GSP. So even if we decide to use something more like this 15 feet buffer, you see the difference is very minimal. We are talking about 1 or 2 feet. That it's kind of the uncertainty that we have everywhere. So it might not. This well might, if we go with this idea of using the historical low minus a buffer, maybe you don't even need to change it with respect to the GSP. Maybe others are different, so we will have to just look at everything and then discuss a little bit more. But it looks like what you have originally defined in 2022 was kind of potentially in line. And I think this is pretty much it. So the idea is that we will go through all the wells and look at what was there in the 2022 GSP, kind of think about these different approaches and see if we land within a couple of feet or 5 feet, I think it means that it's already very defensible. We are just adding more data. So that's what we are doing for the 2027. And I also think it's important we will be explaining how this new interconnected surface water monitoring network is included in the plan. And then the drilling of the new shallow wells for sure will expand the network, but that's going to be step 2 in 2032, pretty much. And I think I'm done. I feel like, I don't know, Dylan, if you want to bring up, follow up with a recommendation, or I can take care of that.
We might just want to give a little preview on what was said at the advisory committee, since we did have those discussions. And then I think for requested actions, we're going to go, maybe just state what they are, any questions, but we're going to ask for any kind of motion and direction on the next item. So if you just want to do the...
And I think basically in general, the WAC was on board with the new monitoring network and the approach. And
so questions I
Sure.
would have is, this is going to be grant-funded work, right? Mm-hmm. We're not going to go back to our ratepayers, however you want to say. And then I guess it's too early to talk about our recharge projects. We'll wait till the next presentation. and then I'll talk a little bit about
Richard?
how they relate.
Ah, okay. I don't know.
Yeah.
The expanded monitoring network in this presentation, that's the one that we have already and allotted some grant funding for that one, or is this a separate?
This is wells that are already drilled. This isn't the new wells that we were asking for before.
It's also a different, it's hard to get your head around, but basically they're saying we have to look at the interrelationship with groundwater and surface water, so it's a different part of our task.
I thought that, I obviously was incorrect. I thought that was part of that was establishing some monitoring wells in the previous.
And those, if I may, they're basically,
For this specific, for this.
they're basically just looking at the groundwater itself. So
Yeah, so those wells
it's a
that we-
nuance, but
Sorry, yeah, the plan that we brought to you like about a year ago, right, to install new wells to incorporate into the monitoring network, that's just because, like you kind of saw, we only have 3 wells right now to choose from for like right now to kind of deal with. The idea is for the 2032 GSP updates, we'll have quite a lot more wells to kind of add to. And the other, like what DWR wants is we want to do separate monitoring networks, like one for groundwater quality, one for groundwater levels, one for interconnected surface waters, so that we can actually see the different data, like how it relates to the different criteria.
And I just want to add one thing, just because one of the reasons, so the wells that we're drilling now aren't going to be on this map because they don't have 5 years of data. So that's why we have to pick from the ones we have access to now, but that will be added. So it's just that 5 years of data is
they're coming
important
up
in
on
that.
5, right?
Okay, so this is finding 3 existing wells, collecting data
Add-
from right
yeah.
now while we're waiting for these other ones to come online.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because even if the new wells were, let's say that you approved them last year, even if the drilling was happening last year, but still it would have been only basically 25, just 1 year and a half of data. And that might be tricky for really setting criteria because we might be too far high and not including any drought. You want to include, we said 5 years exactly because these 5 years have been very variable. So with 2021 being very low and then a recovery, so welcome.
Any other questions by board members? Any public comment on this? All right, let's move on.
Hi again. So now you're going to hear the presentation on groundwater dependent ecosystems, or GDEs. And so this is going to be, it's really closely related to the interconnected surface water discussion. You're going to see the same map, the same 3 proposed monitoring wells that we would like to add to this network. And so just to kind of clarify, we're asking for 2 things. We're requesting 2 different actions. One is to approve our proposed monitoring network, and it's just those 3 additional wells that already have at least 5 years or more of data. And then 2, we asked to approve our proposed approach and timeline. And so that approach is kind of like what Laura mentioned. We're just showing progress at this point. We're showing we're filling data gaps, but we still have a lot of data gaps to kind of fill and collect data on, right? And we're showing that we're making progress. So we're adding right now a small monitoring network, but that timeline and approach is kind of going forward to thinking of 2032 for that GSP update that's going to be due in almost like 5 more years actually. But, so at that point we'll have quite a bit more wells to kind of examine and look at to see and bring to you at that point to see maybe adding more wells to the network. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Byron this time from Environmental Science Associates.
Good afternoon, folks. It's nice to be here. Thanks. Yeah, my name is Byron Amerson with Environmental Science Associates. I'm a geomorphologist and hydrologist with some expertise in groundwater, surface water interactions, and I'm going to share with you some of our results related to groundwater-dependent ecosystems. So first, a brief rundown on the agenda. Basically, I'll give a short definition of what is a groundwater-dependent ecosystem and why we need to identify and map them. What's currently in the GSP and how do we identify them, and then I'll share some results and next steps. Starting with a purpose here, preliminarily, GDEs were mapped for the original groundwater sustainability plan. And based on comments from stakeholders and so on, as well as DWR's own viewpoints, they've asked for some refinements on what ecosystems are groundwater dependent ecosystems, or at least some more information to shed light on making those decisions. So I'm going to present some updates to the GDE mapping as part of that gap filling process. And ultimately, the goal is to get toward this long-term monitoring objective that we've been discussing today. And so the location of potential GDEs will help kind of refine and guide the location of maps that are meant to monitor GDEs, which are, a subcomponent of the interconnected surface waters. So this is a diagram, a couple of diagrams that are meant to depict and help kind of sort of give a bit of a visual on what actually is a groundwater dependent ecosystem. So there is a definition that indicates that a groundwater dependent ecosystem is an ecological community of species that depend on groundwater emerging from aquifers or on groundwater occurring near the ground surface. Now, it's a pretty broad term. It's an ecosystem. In practice, there's been a focus on trees and vegetation as indicators of groundwater-dependent ecosystems, and they themselves, could be perceived as an ecosystem. And so in practice, when we talk about GDEs, we're generally referring to the vegetation, riparian vegetation and so on that's adjacent to rivers and creeks, ponds and so on, or maybe just in an area where there's relatively shallow groundwater. Let's see. So the connected sort of system on the left there, I've sort of circled the trees, and the idea here is that in general, the groundwater surface or elevation is relatively close to the surface, and the roots of the trees and so on have relatively easy access to that groundwater. And in general, that groundwater is routinely near the surface, and so those plants, if I say, become dependent on that groundwater. Whereas on the right, maybe the groundwater table is much lower, and those trees, and vegetation utilize water from some source other than the regional groundwater. So that's kind of a broad kind of definition. So basically, we're mapping groundwater dependent ecosystems because they're a subset of interconnected surface waters. And so part of the Sigma code indicates that mapping groundwater dependent ecosystems is something that GSA should do as part of their ongoing management of the basin and its resources for beneficial users, including ecosystems and so on. So this is a map of groundwater dependent ecosystems, sort of categorizing them into likely, that's the yellow blobs, or not likely to be a GDE based on criteria that were initially established in the GSP at the time. And primarily, just in summary, it was sort of a strategy based on understanding or evaluating whether or not there was a local source supplying water to those ecosystems. And this approach was one of the things that DWR asked for some refinement on. I mean, that strategy is useful, but in combination with other information, it could help sort of refine the definition of what may or may not be a GDE. So, of course, the question is it a GDE, right? And so we need an objective, repeatable measure to determine if a particular vegetation patch is a GDE. And so I'm going to kind of try to illustrate this a little bit with some more diagrams here. Basically, we're going to focus on the general rooting depth for the different species, right? So trees of different species and plants of different species have sort of a rooting depth that will encounter water, groundwater or not. And so these diagrams are meant to sort of depict that notion. And again, this one on the left, relatively shallow groundwater, and the roots of those trees routinely kind of reach into that zone of typical variation of groundwater elevation. Whereas on the right, that zone of variation is deeper than the typical reach of the roots. And so this is one of the criteria that we can use to help sort of sift, I guess, if you will, the different vegetation patches on the landscape to determine if they're GDE or not.
So it's depth to groundwater levels primarily like the main indicator?
Yeah, depth to groundwater is, you know, pretty solid piece of information that's relatively easy to collect, right? If we know the elevation of the groundwater, we have reasonable estimates, we know the ground surface elevation, then we can just take the difference and we calculate depth to groundwater. And that gives us a sense of whether or not that vegetation is potentially a GDE or not, as the case may
So
be.
isn't it kind of an advantage we don't have a great deal of vegetation out there in the middle of our GSA, thank God.
And
Because
that's, you know, probably, you know.
if the groundwater is healthy, I mean, and there's no trees growing out there,
Right, it's more of a, you know, savanna-style landscape, if you will, and the trees are concentrated along river corridors or locations where there's, you know, a pond or, you know, lake or something like that. Right, so,
I see some chainsaw work there, dude.
right, so the two kind of key measures are this depth to groundwater juxtaposed or, you know, correlated with rooting depth of different plant species on the landscape.
There's also, there's a fundamental, well, it's not a flaw, you guys know this, you're smart. I mean, it depends where that stream goes through. I mean, in some places, it could be impermeable clay or rock.
Absolutely.
Clay rock. And
Yep.
so even on the
Yeah.
banks, it wouldn't charge nothing. And in other places, it's very permeable. It's
And that
Gonna-
little, the
yeah.
blobs are sort of meant to try to depict, I guess, like some zone, say, of soil or material that might be
so it's
more
just not a
impermeable.
monolithic thing all
Not
the way
at all,
down.
right?
All
It's quite heterogeneous, right? And in
So-
some cases, you might have a pervasive.
Where I'm going
impermeable
with
layer.
this, how far do we have to go? Because if we have healthy overall groundwater, couldn't we just like keep it minimal instead of studying the whole stream length?
I agree with you, yes. I mean, that's the point of having a few monitoring wells at key locations that are going to
Am I
give us the
making
information.
sense?
No, you're absolutely making sense. Why monitor it all if we can
Right.
choose
Maybe
a few key
different if we're in
locations?
San Joaquin Valley. They deserve everything they get. But, you know,
Well, let's see what the outcome is here, because I think you're
Okay.
going to probably have some thoughts about it, is my guess. So let's
I'm
just
sorry.
see where it goes. No, this is great. This is what we're here for. It's a conversation.
Sorry,
Yeah,
dude.
please, if I lapse into jargon or talking too fast or whatever, I skip a key point, please interrupt me, and I'm happy to talk about it and so on. So one of the key points, though, is, you know, what's our benchmark, right? What is the groundwater level that we're going to use as our reference to make estimates of that depth to groundwater estimate for a particular,
to keep our stream healthy.
to keep, basically to meet the needs of beneficial users, including domestic wells, ecosystems, interconnected surface waters, you know, the whole thing, right? It's really a blanket coverage that's meant to benefit multiple, I guess, beneficial users, right?
So I follow. I'm trying to think ahead. Okay, so say we establish it and we're pretty healthy and we're doing good. Can we just like live on that until there's a observed lowering of the water table or something? I mean, it's going to cost a lot of money and grants are going to run out. I'm trying to see if we can avoid ever going back having to raise our rates to everybody. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
If we make a good benchmark and we make an argument to the state that we're healthy and they accept it, we don't have to keep doing this over and over.
Well, we'd want to track the water level related to that benchmark over time.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we stay there, we're good, right? We
Yeah.
don't have to keep spending money.
Yep. Yeah, and so,
Alright.
you know, picking that benchmark is an important
Okay.
task, I suppose. So
That makes
here's
sense.
a couple of 3 methods that I ended up using to evaluate the different vegetation patches, whether or not they're GDEs on the landscape, right? So at each of those patches, I, you know, used estimates of basically the frequently observed groundwater elevation, essentially the groundwater elevation is at that level at least 90% of the time, so it's routinely at that location, right? It's typical, let's say. And then a couple of other years were used, 2015, which I guess is the second lowest year of groundwater elevation since 2000, and then 2021, which is typically recognized as the lowest elevation since 2000. So kind of a typical, let's say maybe a dry and I guess a very dry type of condition. So these are the three benchmarks that we use to then compare with rooting depth at these different GDE patches across the landscape in the subbasin to see whether or not they basically had their toes wet or not, right, given the groundwater elevation conditions. Right, so basically we calculated depth to groundwater for each of these three cases and determined whether or not it's potentially a GDE, right? If it is touching the water, then it's probably a GDE. If it's not, probably not. And of course, that benchmark is important, right? We don't want to necessarily use a very dry year because that's going to be a relatively low depth to groundwater, a large depth to groundwater. But you'll see the maps and how they change, and it sort of helps inform decision making. And basically, if it's not a GDE, if it never touches regional groundwater, that particular vegetation patch or GDE shouldn't be subject to management moving forward. It's only those that are generally supported by regional groundwater might be subject to dewatering or some other, impact due to management. So this map is meant to depict the species distribution across the landscape. So getting back to your comment about sort of these broad swaths of the landscape don't have a lot of, riparian style vegetation on it, and it's focused along the rivers and so on. We can see that it really is concentrated, say, along the Feather River, for instance. And there's three predominant species. It's going to be willows, cottonwoods, and oaks. And so, willow and cottonwood are by far the most predominant riparian vegetation, along the creeks and rivers in terms of like relatively large trees and shrubs, and then oaks are kind of distributed across the landscape. There's a smattering of other species in there. Also depicted on this figure are the monitoring wells. So there's the three existing monitoring wells that are sort of already in existence, as well as those three proposed from among wells that are already in existence. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Ryan, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's proposed wells are also depicted on here. So this is sort of all the potential wells that could be used for monitoring moving forward, including those that haven't actually been drilled yet. And yes. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, please.
We're going to send you over there, Janet.
So we do have the agreements aren't actually executed yet, but we have verbal agreements right now with the different landowners. Sometimes it's going to be in the right-of-way, like the county right-of-way. In the agreement, it does state if the landowner, for whatever reason at any time, or the GSA wants to opt out, then they are totally able to do that. However, there's also a clause in there that if the landowner sells their land, then the well is it's deeded on the property. So the GSA will own the well. However, when if someone sells their land with the monitoring well on it, we can still monitor. The new person can then decide if they want to, continue forward or not. But we've thought of those clauses already. So yeah, thanks for asking that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, that's a good question because we're relying on that information, and if it's not available, then of course it doesn't help. And I've highlighted this little orange box to kind of foreshadow basically the key finding, and that's that basically targeted vegetation surveys what does it say here? This information combined with depth to groundwater findings suggests that a targeted vegetation survey and establishment of select long-term monitoring sites along the south and central axis of the basin are probably going to be the locations where it makes the most sense. And so I'll sort of walk through the results that kind of drive that conclusion. And I think it makes a lot of sense. It's pretty straight ahead. So if we look at that typical, so the little dots represent basically the center of a patch of vegetation on the landscape that is a potential GDE. And this comes from that, you might remember, it's this natural communities commonly associated with groundwater. It's from the Nature Conservancy, and they just collated these and said, these might be GDEs. You want to take a look at these, right? And so these are the center points of those vegetation patches on the landscape. And what I did was I calculated the depth to groundwater for each of those patches, depending on the species that was there, and compared that to that typical depth to groundwater. And if it's green, that means its little toes, roots touch the water. And if it's red, it didn't touch the water, even though it's, a riparian vegetation that's typically considered, a groundwater-dependent ecosystem. And so we can see this pretty kind of stark line where somewhere in the middle of the basin, as you sort of get into the foothills and so on, those vegetation patches typically don't touch the regional groundwater. And then along the waterways, say the Feather and the lower reaches of Honcut Creek and so on, there's a relatively shallow depth to groundwater, at least during that 90%, the 90th percentile, and most of those seem to, touch groundwater. And so, typically they have their toes wet. If we look at 2015, this is that second driest year. It actually looks really similar to, say, the typical. I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth so you can see how we go. I mean, a few patches up there in the northern part of the Feather seem to go from green to red. But generally, especially in the lower south central part of the basin, they stay green. But there is this kind of north-south trending axis where they are dry to the east, which says they're probably not GDEs. So if we go to 2021, sorry, I'm going the wrong direction. So we can see a bunch of stuff along the Feather. I'm kind of popping back and forth just so you can see what happens there. A bunch of the vegetation along the river appears to have groundwater that's a little bit too deep for them to reach. So somewhere between water table elevations, between the kind of the 2015 water table elevation and the 2021 water table elevation seems to start to dry out the vegetation. And the thing I want to point out is that basically along that kind of, I can't show you the pointer on your screen down there, but basically if you kind of track along from the south central part of the basin, those riparian patches and so on there that are green kind of go dry as water table starts to drop between, say, the 2015 and 2021 location. And so these are locations that may be sensitive to groundwater elevation changing over time, right? So in this case, I think it was a meteorological condition, but one could imagine that if pumping was, or management was so, great that it lowered the water tables, that these vegetation patches might be dewatered, right? And so monitoring wells strategically placed along that south central part of the basin are probably good places to kind of track water table elevation. And that's kind of the key finding there. Let's see if I can go in the right direction here. Right, and I think I've stated all of these things here. Let me just kind of do a quick review. So groundwater levels between the 2015 and 2021 levels seem to be where there's a sensitivity to dewatering for certain vegetation patches in those locations that are subject to that kind of strong elevation change. It's basically that place where the landscape starts to ramp up toward the foothills and the water table is down here, right? And so small changes in elevation might make a pretty strong change in elevation at the root level. And again, the proposed, so there's existing and proposed wells. Some of these are wells that are already in place, and so it's going to be relatively straightforward to take advantage of those guys. And then there's a number of proposed wells to be installed that would help with some of these data collection efforts as well. Let's see. Right, and so there's some vegetation surveys to go double check and just kind of sniff around and make sure that some of these things that we think are riparian, GDEs really are GDEs, and just in general get a feel for their health and so on, and it will help kind of sort of finalize some of our recommendations. And so then there'll be some reporting that comes along with that. Right, so I wanted to revisit this. Any questions at this point, actually?
I was just curious how you chose those locations.
Which locations?
For the proposed sites.
Well, I didn't, actually. That was primarily LWA, and I'm assuming other staff on the GSA worked together to arrive at those locations.
Do you ever look at Southside? Yeah.
So the proposed sites were selected based on looking at where there are existing infrastructure or wells, and then placing these where there are data gaps. And so we mapped all the streams going across the subbasin, and these streams were identified as having gaps along them. And it matches up well with what was needed with the GDEs. So
Pretty basic. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I think something that's a little bit troubling to me is like, if you grew up around here, the way to kill an oak tree is make it too wet. And so I'm wondering where you saw that red line, is that where those beautiful big oak trees grow along the Feather River?
These are a cool map.
Because oaks can't take a steady stream of water, it seems like it. Well, I guess I'm no expert. There's a lot of different types of oaks.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, a valley
these are
oak.
places where oaks have been sort of mapped on the landscape, and we kind of generally know.
And see where it was turning red along there?
Yeah, of course. So the oaks are that kind of like pink color. So most of them are kind of in the savannas, but they are along the creeks and rivers too.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, so let's go.
But the water, see where it turns red down there?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where all those great big oaks live, and I think it's just part of their nature not to have water all the time.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do I know? I just know if people buy a house and has a beautiful oak tree and they put a lawn right up to it,
Yeah.
about 5 years it falls over and the thing's 100 years old,
Right. And so sometimes, right, so between 2015 and 2021, right, like along those lower sections, right, there's oaks down there, and they got pretty dry for a season.
But they made it.
But then they have some tolerance for that, right?
Yeah.
And it just depends on how long that is, right? Like if they're
So
too
that
low
gives
for
us,
10 years.
what I'm
maybe
arguing
not so
for is
good.
that gives us more flexibility. We don't have to
Absolutely.
keep in water
Right,
all the time.
so there's and I'm gonna kind of jam around. So look at this figure here, right? The kind of the light blue band is meant to kind of be this zone of variable groundwater table elevations.
See
right?
it, yeah.
And so, typically the plants are gonna kind of access somewhere in the midst of that. Right,
Alright.
so the low stand is kind of the bottom of that, right? So maybe 2021 is the bottom of the bracket, right? And most of the time the water is kind of
Well, you
fluctuating.
keep, I'm impressed. Every curveball I throw you, you've been hitting it out of the
You're-
park. You're doing good.
Variability is part of the story, without question, and that's real, and that's something that should be accounted for. And the duration,
Because I don't want to get locked into something where we create a problem we don't have. That's really where I'm trying to stay, and I'm trying to save money, to be honest, going forward. So what do we need to do?
Approve.
well, I could present this last slide, or we can bypass. I mean, it might be.
Go to the last
for
slide.
discussion, yeah. So this one is meant to revisit some ideas presented in that came up in the first time. And this really has to do with, how can, say, notice that this GDE protection is 30 feet below the ground surface. And, Oaks are up, cottonwoods and willows are somewhere in the neighborhood of, say, 6 to 10 feet, and,
And they need water.
and they need water, but similarly, oaks are in the neighborhood of, say, 20, 25 feet, something like that, let's just say. And here's a well that is, basically right here in town, actually, and the GDE protection is 30 feet below ground surface. Well, that sounds like it's really too deep. And so this is just meant to kind of illustrate how each well will have maybe a somewhat different minimum threshold that's based on its elevation relative to the groundwater and nearby streams and so on. And so in the lower left, I've drawn a little red line there that basically spans the river just outside town here, or just outside the doors here, kind of crosses the river and traverses across and kind of touches the location of that well. And so what I'm going to show is a little depiction of the kind of a cartoon of the ground surface elevation along that red transect. So in the little figure in the upper right shows elevation on the x-axis and distance along the transect on the x-axis. I might have misspoke. The y-axis is elevation. So the north is the left-hand side, and the south, basically in town where the well is on the right-hand side of that plot. And so we can see the elevation of the ground surface is the black line. And it's meant to, here's that little viewpoint that's just over here overlooking the Feather River. And we can see the vegetation that's inset down along the river. And so in my little cartoon there, I've kind of drawn the trees, inset. And then the gray dash line is the water table elevation, which is also the water surface elevation in the river. And so basically, if we have a GDE protection threshold at the well of 30 feet down, that corresponds to a rooting depth of, say, cottonwoods of about 10 feet, right? And so
Which is on the bank of the river.
That's correct, yeah. And it's just meant to kind of show how each of these monitoring locations is going to have some minimum threshold that's meant to be protective of ISW, so domestic wells, vegetation, and water, I guess flowing waters and so on. And it might be somewhat variable depending on where you are on the landscape because of the well's elevation relative to the water table. That's all this is kind of meant to indicate. So I think we're back to the same final slide as from Laura's slide, which has to do with, well, no, these are WAC recommendations. So this is kind of a whole. Okay, yeah, all right. Oh, is there? Sorry. There we go. Requested board approvals. So I think that this is the final slide.
Mm-hmm.
Apologies.
Questions or comments by board members? Got anything you want to add?
Just a real quick question. Back to the proposed sites, are there any sites close to tribal land? It just kind of,
I think
Were
they're
they
both out of
notified?
groundwater though, unless they're off-site land. They have some off-site land down by Highway 70. They did. I think they're in fractured rock.
I can tell you where some is.
okay.
Right on Wyandotte Avenue, just across from the mini mart at Feather Falls. There's a lot of groundwater right there.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah,
Lyman Creek comes through, and I put that sewer line. There's a lot of water in there. About 12 feet.
no, thanks, I appreciate that. I thought it was kind of close too, so. I
But
don't
once
know,
you get east of Lower Wyandotte, there's
Yeah, I was thinking where the casino is. That's probably not true, but
blue rock.
they dredged right up through there, so there used to be a pretty good source of water. They wouldn't have run a dredger in there. Anyway, we're back off track. What are we
Okay,
gonna do here?
yes,
We're gonna
yes.
approve this?
Are you looking for a motion?
Yeah.
I move that we approve the selected monitoring sites and approve the proposed approach and timelines.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any public comment? Anyone want to come up and speak? Anything you want to speak on this, Duke?
I would just like to say that if you're going to base anything on models, I know that you talked about that model, there's not anywhere near enough information for a model. I mean, we do a model for a site, we may have a page, and there may be 800 elevations, and if we miss 10 or 15, it dramatically changes the results dramatically. So you really have to have a lot of information to build a model. That's all I would say.
I appreciate
Good
that.
information.
But I guess the one thing we have on our side in this basin is that we're pretty healthy. And I agree, we need more wells, but any other comments by anybody? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, passes. Do you want to donate a spot for a monitoring well?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah?
Say it louder.
He's approachable. I mean, he didn't say no.
That's true.
Bill did one. Yeah. Kind of interesting, actually. All right, moving on now. Consideration Wyandotte Creek Sustainability Agency procurement policy.
Alrighty, thank you, Chair Connolly. So even for the next 3 items, we've kind of discussed them a little bit on the last time. So I'm going to give mostly preview of the things we've already talked about and more detail about what isn't. So really for the procurement policy, like I told you before, currently we're using the Butte County procurement policy. And so right now we think that the Wyandotte Creek having its own policy would just be add some flexibility. And then it's kind of more clear about the different roles and then my limitations and what I can do versus what I bring to the board. And I think another nice thing about this procurement policy is it outlines the procedures and the documentation that comes with contracts and procurement. So in the procurement policy, this would give the program manager the authority to sign contracts and purchases for under $25,000, though it would be required that the program manager go to a management committee member and get their sign off on wells. So it wouldn't just be the program manager can go make whatever purchase and do contracts. They would have to check in with a member agency technically because they're on the management committee. So what I would do, or what the program manager would do after they do that, is they would need to report back to the board of any of those contracts at the next board meeting. So contracts, though, that are between $25,000 and $100,000, they need board approval. That's required. Though a competitive bid is not necessarily required, we can do that through negotiation. So whatever, that does give the program manager a little bit more discretion to say this would be the way to go. But when we get to contracts that are over $100,000, that is when we would be required to do a competitive process. Though I will say there is some room for exceptions that I'll get into at the a slide or two next. But again, with oversight and flexibility, management committee has to check it off. If program manager is doing anything under $25,000, reporting back to the board is a big one here. So again, this is requiring some justifications. Why did you do this? And coming into the board. So I think that's a good practice to get into. It also allows for emergency purchases. I don't see that being quite necessary. I haven't thought of a reason why we need it, but it is good to have in there. And that would require the program manager to get 2 members of the board to sign off on that. So
the clear documentation justification goes with that?
Yes, if the program manager were to do an emergency purchase, they would need to come back with documentation and a justification for that.
Okay.
All right. And so for direct awards, so anytime, so something that is over $100,000 and let's say we do not want to go into a competitive bidding process, which is something we'll talk about in a couple more items, is there are limited cases where the board could decide to approve a contract without that process, and that would be for unique experience or expertise, equipment capability, integration with existing systems. So maybe for like the data management, we're working with a certain company who has it on there, so we would just stick with them since they already have the system. And again,
No, I just wanted to go back. Emergency purchases, 2 board members, or would it 3? Because you kind of need a tiebreaker.
If it's an emergency, it'd be a Brown Act violation because it'd be the majority of the board.
Oh, that's right. There's 5 of us. Thank you.
yeah. So
Sorry.
No worries.
So, and I think in there, it says that the chair would be one of those signatures unless
Okay.
for some reason, let's say the chair is gone.
chair.
The next would be
Good.
the vice chair.
Okay.
So if you're getting a random call at 8 o'clock, like it's probably the only thing going on. But again, from my experience here, that doesn't seem very common, but again, would need justification. But yes, justification is also going to be part of this competitive, like the direct awards. So anytime I come to you with a contract over $100,000 that I'm like, we, would like to recommend not doing a competitive process, I have to provide you with a written justification as to why we think this is the right process. And you're going to see one of those in the packet with the contract we're talking about in a couple of items. So with all of that, there was also, there's a few more things in there. They happen to be more about public works projects. We don't do a ton of those, but we would follow, and I forget the exact name of it, but it is basically state law, is we just follow that process. And I think that has to do with taking the lowest bid in those aspects. Okay, so my requested action of the board today is for you to adopt the procurement policy as presented, or modified, or provide direction to me in the legal counsel.
Okay.
Would the under 25,000, whatever you're going to obtain, that's with our budgeted, or whatever that particular thing would be?
Correct. So these are kind of items, let's say we need administrative help on a project or on something small and it's $5,000. We wouldn't necessarily want to wait until the next board meeting to get that done. It might be a smaller one, but it does have to find like the line item that it matches with, and it has to align with the GSA's goals and the GSP. So, and again, that's kind of where we're coming in to make sure that there's at least some kind of oversight would be that member agency looking into it.
Any other questions or comments? Board members, public comment? This matter? Closed public comment. Wishes of the board.
I move that we adopt the procurement policy.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes.
Okay. All right. So financial and administrative systems ad hoc. So we talked about this last time. So one of the things that, again, our agency is moving forward. We're maturing as time goes by. That means the GSA is going to have to start taking on a couple of more financial responsibilities, especially with the grant funding coming to an end. There is also some considerations with the county will be reviewing its cost share agreement. And then also there are just some different financial systems that we would like to get board insight on. We believe this is going to help build capacity, and then also having an ad hoc means that we can get board ideas right in there. I think something to consider is at one of the, when we were talking about that potential fee mechanism, there was a 5-year budget. We're gonna need to do that with the consideration of this cost share that we have with the county and what our financial responsibilities are gonna be. And I think that's gonna be something that having board insight right then and there is gonna be really helpful to staff. So I put on here that this group is to support staff. I mostly mean I'm not gonna make you write a report. So you get to tell me, like have that insight, and then staff will do that report, make sure it has all of your recommendations. But really, also helps to identify what our priorities are. I see one of them is we want to keep those rates low. So I think that that's something that the board can come in and be like, that's one priority, but maybe there are other factors as well as which items are ones that we're willing to maybe budge a little bit on budget and ones that we're like, no, that's just where we can keep it. And also just to help come up with more budget options as well. So, and then at the end of this, the goal would be that we would come to the board with what those recommendations are. So structure and duration, this is going to be a temporary ad hoc comprised of 2 members, supported by staff. We're expecting this to be about a 9-month duration. So hopefully this should all be settled by the next fiscal year. And then, again, it'll conclude with the recommendations from the board. And so today my ask is for you to form a financial and administrative system ad hoc with 2 members, or tell me you don't want to do it.
I think there's one guy that asked the most questions about Mr. Daly. Would you like to serve on that?
I'm happy to, unless I'm willing to defer to anybody if they'd rather.
Anybody else want it?
I don't have the bandwidth.
Okay, I guess you guys don't want it, then it's Daly and I, huh?
It's
Yeah, I'll
hard
do it.
to tell you now.
Bruce,
The time
Bruce said he would.
going to be the second.
Is that okay?
So I will say just one factor into it, and this could be, is that a lot of these decisions will depend on county decisions. So right now, Butte County, we have a cost share with Butte County. And this GSA really benefits financially because Butte County provides a lot of services. That's including, I am technically a
Maybe
Butte
I ought
County.
to do it. And I'll tell you the background is that the county would like to divest itself and set us off separate, but I actually see it as has to be part of the water department. They're like this. There's no reason. So maybe I should take it, Bruce. I mean,
that's fine.
you know what I'm trying to say? Because they're trying to like say you can go stand on your own, and it shouldn't be that way because our water department is really part of this. So it'll be him and I,
Okay.
right? Is there, you got a head nod with everybody?
I'm good.
Do you need a motion and a second and all that?
Yes, please.
Um,
I make a
I'm-
motion that we accept the volunteering of Mr. Daly
Mr.
And
Conley.
Bruce.
and Mr. Conley.
Oh, I got to
oh,
Mr.
yes.
All those in favor say aye.
I,
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we did that one. Now the tricky one here.
Did you have a second? I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah,
I'll second.
I made the motion, I think,
I'll second it.
You'll second it?
I thought I heard second it.
There you
Just
go.
real quick, I don't know if I could have missed it. Did we get public comment?
Oh, public comment on the matter? We got one public. He was, okay, sorry.
Just wanted to make sure in case legal counsel came back at us and said we had to do it again.
No, that's right. That's
Okay.
right.
All right. On to the last, one of the last items. So this is the presentation of the contract with
Could you explain why we're doing a new fee study again, just briefly?
Yes, definitely can. So
I think I know why.
So one of the reasons we're looking into a new fee study is that the Vina GSA just north of us recently passed a new fee mechanism through the Prop 26 process. The Prop 26 process is much simpler and it allows for a lot more flexibility for the GSAs. I think that there was also this idea that in the Vina GSA, it received a lot of positive feedback from all stakeholders who got buy-in, and I think that was a positive aspect of this certain plan. I think another factor is that there were some issues or some discrepancies and changes in the data from our original fee study. So in the original fee study, there were some miscalculations of what the accessible acres was. So unfortunately, due to the updating of data, those same numbers in fee study doesn't match what our budget is going to be. So because of the grant funding and because we've tried to keep costs low, we've been able to stick with that 5-year budget and that 5-year fee plan. But unfortunately, as we move forward, that's not, the potential is that we won't be able to fund our budget even if we were to do the max fees. So the hope would be that once we do this, we will have a more accurate data set. And I will say, just from my experience with Hansford Economic Consulting, is that we got those numbers, like in the VINA GSA, they were very accurate, and it made that tax roll a lot simpler, and it got approved. So that's some of the reasons why we are initiating this. And the other factor is that right now we have $100,000 set aside from the Sigma grant. So our hope is that we can do this a little bit faster so that we can use as much of that $100,000 so that it's not going back onto the ratepayers. So that's.
Are we going to look at how much we collect from the different categories?
Yes. So back in August.
I knew the answer to that, but I didn't ask the question.
But yes, we have a bunch more. We have some more categories here than we had in VINA, just because we do have access to surface water. So.
Okay, does anybody have any objections at looking at this? All right, let's go.
Okay. So again, we kind of talked about the purpose. We're building off of that prior fee work. Again, Hansford Economic Consulting already came in and provided us with a fee mechanism. So we already have a head start. So our assumption right now is that the board liked that system, and so that is a good place that we're starting. So one of the first things we'll do is we're working into stakeholder feedback to say, this was what the old fee structure was, here is the potential next structure, how do people feel about it? So that's going to happen on, first we're going to start with some stakeholder meetings starting at the next advisory committee meeting. The scope of work, so we're going to be refining the projection budget. So again, we're going to be re-looking at that 5-year budget. She's going to evaluate and develop a fee structure. So again, we kind of have most of that work done. We already looked into this one system, but again, the board can kind of, whether you say, we want to just stick right with this, or we want to make a couple different changes. But our assumption was, as we were going into this with, this looks like a pretty good fee structure. We liked it. We want to stick with that course. And I will say, if your big consideration is that Sigma grant funding, a lot of that it would be contingent on us sticking with that structure, which we don't have to. It's just that we'd have to spend a little bit more time, and unfortunately that funding stops in March. So this would be to prepare a Prop 26 compliant fee report, which was another nice thing. That same mechanism and process was done in VINA, so we kind of have an understanding of like the justifications and how that works. So we really get to benefit from that. And then also she'll be there, or HEC will be there to support the board through the adoption process. So public hearings, all of those items. And luckily I just did the process, so I can make that a little easier. So this would be a direct award. We did not do a competitive bidding process, and the justification is in your packet. I wrote that out as to why we recommend to go ahead and do the direct award, and that's one that this consultant has extensive experience with Prop 26 processes. They did the VINA fee study. They are already familiar with our structure. They have a lot of the data that they will continue to get to use that is cost effective. Again, successful in the VINA GSA. I think that's really helpful. And then also the competitive process would risk this funding loss, us being able to tap into that $100,000. We do. We have, that's right. Forgot about that. No. So the budget, this is the contract amount would be $104,000. Our estimate is that we could probably get about 80% of that completed by March 26th, based on keeping that mechanism fairly similar to what was presented in August. So this is going to include outreach, stakeholder meetings, and adoption support. So it doesn't include the tax roll, though we have a separate budget for that, so we don't necessarily have to worry too much about that. So my requested request to the board today is that you waive that competitive procurement process and that you approve this contract with Hansford Economic Consulting for $104,000.
Public comment? No. Okay.
I move that we approve the professional services contract with Hansford Economic Consulting in the amount of $104,000.
I'll second it.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay.
Just for the sake of making sure I'm all covered, in that motion, can we include that we're also waiving the procurement, or the competitive
Oh,
procurement process?
and also waiving the competitive procurement process.
Thank you. Okay, those were my three. All I have left is my manager's report.
Yeah, GSA Program Manager,
Okay.
Dylan.
All right. I had it there. Okay, so most of my report is going to be about the fee study, actually. So our consultant was allowed us a little bit of time before the contract going in, just because it seems like that was a process, and we wanted to get this started as soon as possible, again, because of the timeline. So as of right now, we are going to meet with the initial stakeholders. That's going to include at the advisory committee on November 6th. We'll be meeting with South Feather Water Sewer Agency. And we'll also be meeting with a couple other stakeholders, including one of the board members. We will be having more meetings. The general sense is we would do one large public meeting, but as of right now, we're starting in the stakeholder feed. We'll go to the advisory committee. We'll come back to this board in November. Due to this fee study happening happening pretty quickly within March, I will say that that means that we'll probably be adding an additional meeting for the Wyandotte Creek board. So I don't know if we were originally scheduled for December, but we are now. And generally we try not to have board meetings in January, but I think just with the timing of it, we'll most likely have a board meeting there as well. So just be aware of that. You might see that on your calendar. I also just wanted to check in. We are considering, just because we also I do both the Vina GSA and the Wyandotte Creek. The way it might be helpful for our meeting structure is if we could potentially change this board meeting from the 4th Thursday of the month to the 3rd Thursday of the month. And I just wanted to get your initial thoughts, because even if you don't know now, maybe if you could look at your calendars and see if that works. And when I come back in November, you could let me know if that would work for you all.
Thanksgiving? No.
No, I would never. Don't you all want to go back to your families for your big dinner? I do. Yeah. But yes, so just expect that. And then one other part is for the data gaps. We're going to be doing a public meeting. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, that's going to happen on November 13th. So we're going to be sending out mailers, the newspaper, those kind of items. Luckily, we have outreach dollars for that. We're also getting some free services from DWR for their facilitation support services. So again, when we can get some free support, we're using it. So they're helping us facilitate those items. So it's on the 13th. It'll be at the Grange in 5:30? At 5:30. So, and that's going to be to the whole public. Yes. And I think that's all I have for you today.
Any questions or comments on that? Any public comment on that? Okay, next up, how about sustainable groundwater management grant projects update?
That is just a written report for your reference. So that's just in there in case you want to take a look.
All right. Now we'll move on to public comment. You can comment on anything not on the agenda. We cannot take action as it was not agendized. Would you like to speak? Made you smile a little bit? Yeah. All right, we're adjourned we'll be back here November 20th, 2025 at 2 p.m.
Thank you. Gotta go.
And I don't think anybody cares moving it to the 3rd. Thursday's a Thursday for me. I play.
I always have meetings. Whatever works best for the majority of you.
I'm flexible as well.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I'll put them on the invite. I need to because our office in.
I think about you all the time, man. That's just awful. Yeah, but it's going so good. It looks so good. I mean, you went all the way down and compacted everything. You had all the drainage in. What about the SWIP for this winter? Is it?
I didn't have swept, and then he got swept, and he got swept too.
So he's probably not going to do it. Well, you know, hopefully the county doesn't go out there and interject themselves. I don't think it's going to hurt anything. I know it's illegal not to have it.
He's saying that he's still alive. He said
I saw that. I passed that on, by the way.
he's putting another one. $3 million on the table. Who in the world's gonna pay $10,000 worth of